Okay, so it's on. It's recording here. Everything seems to be in place. Okay. So first of all, thanks for coming here, Steve. It's nice to see you again. I've looked at some of the screenshots that you've sent me as we spoke before. The purpose of this whole thing is to interview experienced traders who know what they're doing, not just anybody who knows a little bit. And I've seen it. I've looked at some of the statements, and I like what I see. You have experience in trading. You've been profitable, which is very important for this interview and for everybody who is going to watch this interview. So I just wanted to start by asking you how did you get into trading, and you know, how many years of experience do you have? Just basically, you know, when did it happen? Why you got involved, and you know, what are you doing now?
Yeah, no, definitely. So I probably got into trading probably about around 15 years ago. So about 15 years ago is when I started with trading. So I used to work for the second biggest stockbroker in Australia, which was E-Trade Australia. Worked there for about 12 years. That is now called ANZ Share Investing, and basically it was sold to CMC Markets. Obviously, CMC Markets is a CFD provider. So I was actually involved in the whole project from the intermediary side to actually convert that across to CMC. So I've dealt with basically the director of stockbroking, a lot of the C-suites of executive team. But my whole passion with trading, I've been share investing for a very long time. When it comes to more of CFDs, I started probably about 2016, but really made it a full-time sort of role within 2018. Obviously, you've seen my statements from IG Markets as well as Plus 500. So I made about $33,000 profit when it comes to AUD. And yeah, I think the outlay was around maybe 200,000. So fairly decent. And that was within a short period of time. I think it was maybe a few months or so. That was really when I did a full-time sort of business. So I had my own personal business, and then decided to go back into normal everyday work. So normal 9 to 5 job. At the moment, I've gone really back into trading. I predominantly look at the FX. I look at indices. I've looked at cryptocurrency. I've well across any sort of metals or commodities. So Brent oil, silver, gold, anything, pretty much anything I can look at, I can trade. More recently, within the past 2 months, I've started FTMO challenges as well as MFF challenges, as well as Search Trader. So I've started them. I've found that bit of success. So I've probably passed at least 7 evaluations. I've accumulated yeah, quite a bit of supplemental income when it comes to that. So yeah, just and generally speaking, I pass those challenges within a matter of days or even hours, based on the current sort of volatility we're seeing within the market. So a lot of my technique, it is yeah, it's based on a lot of trends, as well as technical analysis, scalping from any sort of different sort of style. But I read a lot of economic newses, so I see everything from what's happening in America, what's happening in other sort of international countries. But yeah, and that's really basically how being involved in trading, especially a lot of FTMO and MFF challenges. So yeah, that's about it.
Okay. You touched on it, but can you talk a little bit more about your strategy? It sounds to me that you're using a mix of being a technical trader as well as a fundamental trader. You said you follow the trends, so you are somewhat technical, and then
Yes.
you do follow some fundamental news. From personal experience and from having spoken to other traders, they usually tend to focus on one more than the other. How about you? Is this something that you also do? Are you more of one than the other, or you find a way to blend the two? And if you do, how do you do that?
Yeah, so I find that I blend a lot. So I like to look at the context. So what's happening in the world. Obviously, if you look at the moment when it comes to inflation, so all the CPI numbers from the US. So obviously the CPI numbers, people do think that they've kind of peaked. So I looked at all the fundamentals when it comes to macroeconomics. But then I also look at certain trade patterns. And what I do is I observe certain, there's a tendency that you'll find certain patterns. So obviously lately it's been more of a head and shoulder patterns that's been very prominent. I obviously look at certain support and resistance levels. So whether it's psychological barriers or anything like that, high volatility, look at, the scalping method is obviously a popular one. But because I've got a lot of experience with seeing past historical trends, while I also use a lot of the the analytics, so any sort of indicators that help me kind of come up with the decision, as well as look at other different sources with different sort of trader ideas, and I just really come up with the informed decision. But when it's a live trade, I'm the type that just makes sure that I'm very confident when it comes to my decisions. And I also make sure that I have the risk management sort of discipline to make sure that I'm not obviously over leveraging myself. Unless I'm very confident, while I'm also very wary of different correlations. So at the moment, for example, a lot of instruments like silver, gold is correlating with the US 30, certain forex, for example, AED, USD, as well as Brent oil. Brent oil, obviously, if that goes up, there's a tendency to see that maybe the US 30 will go down because of the concerns of inflation and recession. So it's really a big combination of mix, and just looking at some graphs. So I feel like I've kind of, after so much years of really dedicating, it's my passion, my hobby, and I've accumulated so much knowledge that, I just obviously want to share it, and help other traders become better, because it's something that's difficult. Not many people succeed, especially with those challenges. From what I understand, from what I've read, is that probably about 10% of people actually pass those challenges. And from what I've also heard is that people take the 30 days, where generally speaking, I might take generally speaking less than 1 week or even a few days, so or even a few hours. But yeah, I've got also the confidence in my ability, that I don't have that sort of emotional side. So a lot of it is also about when people get emotions, just like, for example, poker. When you have a few bad beats and you kind of go on tilt, I use that. And I just make sure that every trade, if I'm having a bad day, I'll just stop, and then I'll just make sure that I recover, because I've always got the confidence that even if I'm down, I can always recover. And that takes a lot of time. So it's building that resilience, that I've also learned from my sort of work, so my normal profession and my sort of career within financial services.
Okay, you mentioned two things that I find quite interesting. The first thing is about the psychology of trading, keeping discipline,
Yes.
and the second thing you mentioned is about recovery. By recovery, you mean that if you have a losing position, then kind of how you turn that around. Is this what you mean?
Yes, so for example, like there are, because the FTMO challenge or MFF challenge, because there is the SEM drawdown, for example, there's also different strategic components that you can look at. So how I see it is I try to break it down from a strategic point of view. That if you're, for example, sometimes I'll have like a day where I'm 100% success rate or 80% success rate. I rather ride that momentum, see how I go. If, for example, that stops and you have a few bad trades, then that's at least you'll be in profit for that same time. If, for example, I'm having bad, then I will have to, work out the drawdown and kind of break it down. So, for example, if it's a 100K challenge, you've got 5K drawdown, you could break up to 2.5 to try to get into profit. And then you've got another 2.5. So you've got different ways of it to actually attack it. Because I find that a lot of traders will probably not think strategically of how to pass it quicker. So that's why I've kind of developed that sort of strategy as well. Because when with certain trading patterns, when you're on a roll, you'll find that you've got that confidence. You can really do quite a bit and actually have a really great day. But when obviously you're probably not getting the right decisions, it means that sometimes your timing's off, and you just need to reset. So therefore, you have a bit of time in between, and then you can reset. And there's been days where the timing's been off maybe by a few hours, but then the following day I've been able to recover. So there was a challenge where 100K challenge, I went down to probably about 93,000, and I ended up passing that MFF challenge with one trade. Went from 93,000 to 108,000, which is the target. So I've got that ability where I know that I can recover from any position, and I've got, like, for example, a surge trader certificate which shows on the 100K challenge where I went actually down to probably about 92,000, and then ended up getting that challenge successfully. And I think that was around 60 something percent was the success rate. And that was actually my second challenge I did. So that I did that about in June. Lately, my sort of success rate's probably about 80% to or higher at the moment lately.
That's nice. That's very impressive. You mentioned that about 10% of people pass those funded account challenges.
Yes.
What do you think is the biggest challenge to someone who is trying to do this? Is it the strategy that they use? Is it the discipline, psychological component, or is it? I guess it falls into the second category, but patience, stress, and anxiety, not being able to handle a big drawdown like the one you just described. I mean, I know that probably it's some sort of a mix of all three, but if you had to point to the single one most important thing to
Yes.
pass a challenge like this, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say that time. So from what I've heard when it comes to other people is that a lot of traders are utilizing the whole 30 days. So with most of the challenges, you've got a certain time limit. So they might go up to, for example, close to the 20 days, and they're nowhere near the actual profit target. So therefore, they then need to actually take more risks, and they're not calculated risks. They're actually really big risks, and they're really rushing to get towards the end. So it's more like not looking at the fundamentals. It's not having that strategy in place. It's really just kind of gambling away to try to achieve that challenge. When you structure it differently, and if you can get a profit towards the beginning, then it's just really easy then just to kind of you don't have to then rush. You've got more time. So a lot of it's about time, and a lot of people are also really overexposed. So, for example, I did have one client recently as a case study. So I was actually trading on their account. I was up by 350 USD, and this was a 50 K challenge. the positions that I wanted to actually put on, they were too tempted to actually trade themselves. So what they did was they opened all these positions in silver. They were going long with silver. And realistically, I knew in my mind that both silver and very risk sensitive currencies, like for example, the AUD USD, that was going short. So this client of mine actually ended up putting all these positions with long silver. I knew it was going short, so obviously, if they allowed me to trade without being tempted to trade, would have easily passed that challenge. But unfortunately, they did that, and by the time that I could see the account, because they were trading the account in their time zone, it was too late. There was only 100 USD to play around with, so there was no way that I could recover. I've had a example recently where another client actually had only made 2,500. Actually, sorry, made $2,500 loss within 27 days. So they only needed 3 days in order to recover that, 2.5K loss. So I looked at the trades, I analyzed the trades. I didn't understand how they could have made such a big loss over such a long period of time. So it was up to me to actually recover their account. And with FTMO or MFF challenges, for example, if you're in the positive, you can actually get a free retake. So I was able to actually, I looked at a position in silver, and I was very confident with going long. I put the position on. I had to obviously make more calculated risk because there was 3 days until the account was totally gone. So that client would have lost their money. I ended up making that 2.5K within a matter of hours. So I was able to recover that account so that it would live another day pretty much. But a lot of people just they probably overexpose themselves and don't necessarily know a lot of the correlation. And for example, if you look at the US dollar index, it gives you obviously an indication with how the USD is going against other currencies. So having all that sort of background knowledge, a lot about the basic economics, it really does help make that informed decision and make that correct one.
You also mentioned what I guess is risk management.
Yes.
Do you, when you trade, I would imagine that you have a stop loss. Although when you said that you had a drawdown of 93K, then I was thinking, what happened to the stop loss?
Yeah, so that's obviously the strategy with that was attacking it at first. This took a bit of a few days in order to obviously get to that 93K. But that was different sort of positions. So it's not necessarily one position, but eventually got down to that. And then, I guess with the stop losses, it really depends. There's certain I really like to look at, I guess, the support resistance levels, but I also monitor the movement. So you can see that there's usually a pattern that's forming. So whether or not it's, there's a lot of traps. So there could be a bull bear trap. So it looks like it's going to be breaking out, but it's a reversal. So I like to make sure that I put the relevant stop losses in, but depending on the movement, I might adjust it, as well as looking at those sort of psychological barriers, and any other sort of indicators. So, for example, it's very common when news is announced when it comes to Forex, for example. So there's a tendency with news, because once it's actually coming out, and a lot of the times it comes out at 10:30 Australian time, so within the US, because of the time zone, and a lot of it you'll see that the actual activity prior to it, especially within 1 hour, it can go up and down really volatile. But once that news is announced, then all other traders are trying to understand and really digest what that means for the market. So you'll actually see that I've noticed that sometimes it will go from the opposite direction and then it'll go down. So it's not going to be a one, like you're also trying to overcome and actually think about what a lot of traders are going to do. So it's not like, the numbers are great, so something's going to go up. You know, it's got to go a certain direction, and you've kind of also got to think about, all these other traders. There could be a lot of big traders working in groups, which kind of manipulate obviously the currency or whichever market you're in. So I'm always worried about that. So it's not fundamentals. There are certain tricks that people try to do. So, for example, a lot has been happening, especially within Forex. So AUD, USD recently, and I've seen it go from 1,000 pips, which is which is it's pretty much insane to see 1,000 pips that it'll drop by. And then in a week's time, it's gone up by 1,000 pips. It's now down by probably about 300 from the highs. So, looking at that sort of volatility, like a lot of people would have been stopped out. And it's being conscious that you are going to be stopped out with that, sort of level of activity, especially with that sort of volatility. So, having that holistic approach and just knowing that, it's not straightforward.
What is your favorite asset class to trade? Is it in the FX space? Is it in the commodity space? If you had to trade one thing for the next 10 years, what would it be?
So probably my favorite. Well, I've got two favorites. If it's going to be indices, it's always the US 30. So the US 30, there is a bit of a trend I see with that. Obviously, it is one of those ones which is it is riskier because of the movements and because of obviously company announcements, especially during the sort of period that you're in. But it also allows you with that sort of volatility. You always worry about market open because there's a lot of volatility that you could, even if you put your stop loss, there's big weeks that can obviously work against you, and it won't hit your stop. It'll damage even further. But the more conservative would be AUD USD. But again, around any sort of news events, that again, works. You need to be very conscious when it comes to that. I've found that there's certain patterns that the USD, well, the US 30, kind of, especially outside of the market hours, that sometimes there's a common trend. So you can kind of maybe, get a certain amount because it's quite up and down. So if you know exactly, what sort of direction it's heading, you can potentially get a few pips. Just make sure that you get out, and that you can also, if you've got a favorable position, you could also just follow. So follow the stop loss and make sure that you can lock in that profit. But those two pairs are probably what I'm really accustomed to. For example, gold, silver. When you put silver positions, you do need to be very conscious, especially around the position that you're putting, because some of the positions that you put, it could be $50 a point, could be $25 a point, and that does go very volatile. So you'll see, if you look at different graphs, it'll go very volatile. So you could be losing thousands in a matter of minutes. So it's not, unless you have that sort of experience and exactly how to trade that, I wouldn't recommend that.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So we have just over 2 minutes left. I can see this on the top of the screen. One last question. What would you advise somebody who is trying to pass the one of those funded accounts challenges right now? If you could just advise them one thing for 30 seconds, what would it be?
Make sure that they start with demo accounts. If you're going to start for the first time, I guess understanding the rules. Yeah, there's a lot of rules that you do find out when it comes to the challenges. So, for example, when it comes to MFF, they've got rules around the open positions as well as the closed positions when it comes to the 5% drawdown. Bit different to the FTMO. Also, make sure you know what the time zone is. So, in most of the times, it's CEST time or GMT time. So understanding that, me being in Australia, for example, it's a different time zone, so I need to make sure that, if anything resets, that I'm really across it. But yeah, the main thing is also confidence. Is that if you're lacking that sort of confidence, you kind of set yourself up to fail. But when you're confident in your ability, you've got a clear strategy of how you want to attack the challenge, and making sure that that risk management is there. That you use your calculated risks, that you're not overexposing yourself, and really, just make sure that you don't let the emotions get in the way, because if you're having a bad trade and it really affects your mindset, you're also really going to hinder yourself. So once you've got that great mindset, then you'll be right.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, thanks for that. We have less than a minute, so we'll have to stop this interview. We may continue for one more sometime further down the line. For everybody who saw this video and likes Steven, you guys can hire him. Just click on the link below and you will access his profile. Steven, thanks again, and I'm sure we'll speak again. Thank you.
Thank you, Vasco. Really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Guys.